Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making a throwback tech house song inspired by Mr. Belt and Wezol's song, It's Not Right, But It's Okay. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 6 hours by using the 80-20 rule of tech house music production. What you're listening to right now is the song that we'll be working on, and what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to go over things in order that I actually created them, so starting with the drums, then adding the bass, then all the melodic elements like the synths and the vocals, and then once the overall loop has been built out, we'll then stretch it out so we can have a completely finished, arranged track. This way, as you're building out your own songs in this style, you can follow along with these kind of steps to really dial in your own workflow. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video. We'll be doing a full recap of that 80-20 rule, so that you can make sure you're applying all this to your own music super quickly as well. Because, like I mentioned at the top of this only took me about 6 hours to completely finish this one, fully arranged, mixed, mastered, and ready to go. And if finishing songs fast just like this is something that you love help with, I've made you a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song like this every single week. Just visit the link that's on screen now or in the description to grab the ultimate song finishing toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level, you can also find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. But with that said, let's jump into this. All right. So the first thing is, main key is to make sure that you have the actual reference track in here. So we have the tune, It's Not Right, But It's Okay, up in here, and it's turned off, and I've mapped the S key. So I can flick back and forth. And the main thing is you want to first make sure you've got the right notes. So if you have a look at the notes here, listen back and forth. It's just classic 4 on the floor kind of pattern. Next thing is to choose the right sound. So if we have a look at the sound, right now what I'm using is a sample from our friends over at Rocket Powered Sound. It's the Eyes EDM kick, and what's more important is the way that I got this. So what I've been doing lately that I think is pretty cool is if we go over to the reference track, I think near the end here, what I did was I found a section of the song. If we listen right here, right there, and what I did is I clipped basically the kick, and then I dragged that into this rack here called the R kick. So you can see here, it's been thrown in, and we can have the kick isolated here. And basically I just made this rack that has a bunch of settings that help isolate the kick even further from the rest of the reference track. So by increasing the filter envelope and bringing down the filter frequency, we're able to kind of isolate the kick without just, what would it be called, low passing all of it, which can sound unnatural. Just a little other few things, increase the velocity, and I think that might have been it. Reduced a bit of the, brought down the high shelf a little bit over here. We can see that. Then what I did is I flattened and froze that so that I ended up with like a kick here. So you can see here, flattened and frozen kick. We solo it and listen to it. That's the kick. That way it's more or less just the kick. You might kind of hear a little bit of hi-hat in there. So once the kick is nicely isolated, you could use this in your tracks for sure. But what I've been really loving lately is what you can do with Ableton 12 is if you right click it on it and you say show in browser, it'll show that sample there. And then you can press this right here and it'll find similar sounds within your library. And you can kind of go through this and basically create like a little drum rack, as you can see that I did here, filled with all these different sounds that kind of sounded similar. And then what you can do then is you can use a selector like I have here. So if we play this, you can adjust the selector to quickly audition stuff that you have in your rack there. But you can also just go like this. If you go into the Midi, you can go like this and just play it like that. And then as you're doing that, make sure you're flicking back and forth between what you have here and the reference track. And when I was originally doing this, I was doing this at the back half of the song when there's just kind of drums for like the DJ outro. That's a cool way how I got the kick there. In terms of any other processing, that's really it. A little bit of the standard channel strip stuff that I did, so I just shoved out a bit of the highs here. And I've been really liking using drum bus for the last little bit. So if we listen to the kick with drum bus and then without, it just kind of, it's definitely adding some volume, which is part of it, but it can add a little bit of fullness to the track. Main thing that I'm doing is I'm not playing with too much of the saturation or anything. Bringing down the damp a bit to get rid of a bit of the top end. Main thing I'm dialing in is this boom here, and then bringing in down the decay so it's not too much. Kind of just trying to dial it in. And adds a little bit of body and fullness to the kick. I've been really enjoying that in the last little bit, so something there. But yeah, main thing is first, let's get this loop back here actually. Yeah, so first thing, get the notes, then choose the right sounds, and then the main key thing is, yeah, you can do drum bus and all kind of processing like that, but really the key is just getting the volume correctly. So adjusting your levels until it's similar to what you have in the reference track. Kind of like this is how I usually do it, flicking back and forth almost musically. So that's a look at the kick. Then let's move over onto the clap. So let's take a look and a listen to that. So what I've done is I've layered two different claps. This again from our friends over at Rocker Powered Sound. The Plains clap and the Chrome clap. All of these are from the Ultimate Sample Pack, which is like a whole ton of samples, which makes it super useful to comb through all that. Especially when doing the similar sounds thing, because I believe there is a chance that if we go over here to the reference track, no. So I didn't do the similar sound function for the clap, just kind of listened through a bunch of samples to find something that works and made sense. Again, looking at the pattern first, it's just like the kind of standard snare or clap pattern where it's on like the 2 and the 4 of the beats. I don't know why I kind of cut it up funny. I would ignore that. Normally it would probably just look something like a normal 4-bar loop like this. Probably just as I was arranging things and moving stuff around. But yeah, so once you have the note selection, then the main thing is the sound selection. So I was just kind of going through claps in like my library here, and then just kind of doing this. Kind of rhythmically in time like that to try to find the right sounds. Then again, once you find the right sounds, main thing is trying to get your levels to be at similar volumes. Once your levels are at similar volumes, just kind of standard mix as you go channel strip stuff. So removing a bunch of the lows to make room for the bass and the kick. We're not using any transient shaping, but I will go over that when we get to it. We're using the Ableton saturation. I've just mapped the knob to one of these racks here so that you can quickly use your eyes instead of like digging into the settings. And then also the all this channel strip loads on every one of my audio and MIDI tracks, so I'm not all the time grabbing an EQ8, all the time grabbing a sidechain and all that kind of stuff. It's always there, ready to go. And then other than that, I guess one weird thing that you can see that I did here is I was kind of hearing the claps kind of like having this reverb that was like almost like tuned, like one hit was lower than one hit was higher. And the way I went about replicating this is I just kind of automated. I added a hybrid reverb onto this. I don't know if I play with the settings too much. I might have adjusted the decay to make it so that it felt like a bit like it's decaying in time with the song. But the main thing is you can see I've adjusted the EQ on the reverb, so one hit is low and then one hit's high. Just a, I don't know, kind of cool little trick, add some movement and vibe, and change over time to the track. Kind of humanization thing almost in a way too. Then what I added next was this snare. Let's have a look and listen to that. So same patterns on the 2 and the 4, just like the clap. I'm not 100% sure if there's a snare in the original track. If we flick back to the reference, it might be there. It sounds like it's definitely very clap heavy. I usually like to do something like this. I guess actually I should mention this real quick. Back over in the claps, I have 2 different claps added in there. And if we look into the drum rack, we go over to controls. One has been panned to the left and the other one has been panned to the left also. Oh no, sorry. One has been panned to the left and one has been panned to the right. Yeah, so I'm using the Plains and Chrome claps. And I think one is tuned up. The transposition has been moved up. The idea I usually go for is like claps, kind of left and right, doing stereo stuff, and then a snare in the middle, adding a little bit more body and weight to that drum hit right there. So for this one, mostly layering in for taste. Kind of like that. And then standard channel strip stuff. So what we are doing here is EQ8 is removing a bit of the lows, leaving room for the kick and the bass. Some saturation here, which is adding some fullness and some body to the sound. And then I do have this raw or preset diode treatment that comes in kind of more in a build-up in the track as more of an arrangement trick. So I'll go over that if I go into an arrangement video later. So then let's have a look and listen to this next bit, which is a bit of a top loop here, just a bit of a break at the beginning. I kind of hear, like, if you listen to the original track, that thing. I was trying to emulate that with a drum break. A little different. I kind of like the original one better. This one's a little bit more like, I don't know, it sounds more muffled and lower in the mix. But basically, I just found like a cool drum break on Splice, grabbed the beginning chunk of it that had that, or I don't know if it was the beginning or not. Yeah, it was the beginning that had that cool little kind of hi-hat bit, and just added that to the beginning of every 16 bars, I want to say. And then in terms of any processing, just removing much of the lows with the standard channel strip here, some one knob sidechain to add a bit of that pumping vibe that also makes room for the kick, and a little bit of Apes and saturation to fill out the sound a little bit, and that's about it. The main thing there is to set up the volume so that it's proper against the reference track. So then the next thing I added was this drum break, which sounded like this. Solo for a second. So in the original tune, there might be a bit of a drum break in there. I always like adding in some kind of drum break or some top loop to go against the core sounds that we've built out. So the core sounds being like the kick, the clap, the snares, and the hi-hats that we'll get into in a bit. It adds a lot more like character and groove to the tune, and a lot of like human, cool, interesting feel that you just can't get with you can't always get with like programming in Midi and those kinds of things. So I really like working with samples like that for that reason. In terms of any processing, one thing I like to do is if you set the warp to beats and then you change it to the arrow pointing to the right, you can drag down this amount here, which is going to kind of tighten up the transients, which I like the sound of the tightness, and I also like how it can help blend in with those core sounds that you've programmed in with Midi and one-shots. It can blend in a little bit more better, I would say. Then in terms of any processing, standard channel strip stuff here with maybe some tricks, we'll see. Notice standard channel strip. So we're removing a bunch of the lows, shelving out a little bit of the highs, which could be a nice natural way to reduce some of the highs. The low pass can sometimes sound a little unnatural. Sometimes it could sound amazing, but in this instance, I went for the high shelf. Then now we're using the transient shaper here. So this is playing with the transients of each one of the hits, and I'm using the 3 kilohertz transient shaper plugin. The only thing is I have mapped the key, values or knobs to an Ableton rack. So that way I don't have to always open up the transient shaper and open up the window and all that kind of stuff. It's just always there, ready to go to make quick adjustments. So the main thing I'm doing is bringing down the sustain, which is tightening up the sound a little bit further as well. Then we're running into a one knob sidechain, which is just using Ableton shaper device, mapped to quarter notes, which is usually what Kick's doing anyways, and it's just bringing down the volume. So this way you don't need to jump into a compressor and all that kind of stuff. It's just right there for you. You can dial it into taste, use your ears, and then move on. And then a little bit of Ableton saturation to fill out the sound a little bit. And then we are running into this width little module that I've made, which again is another free plugin called Polyverse Wider. And again, just mapped the key knobs to this little Ableton rack so that it's just there for quick access. So what we're doing is bringing up the width, which is pushing the sound to the left and the right, making some space in the middle, and just kind of giving like a cool, nice stereo vibe. Then next up, let's have a look and listen to the open hi-hat. Let's jump into the Midi too for you. So basically what's going on here is it's a standard hi-hat pattern as I've highlighted here, which is like on all the off beats. And I've made it so like every other beat is like one's a bit louder, one's a little lower, one's a bit louder, one's a little lower, with the velocities to add a little bit of humanization feel, make it not sound like a robot. And then that's the main thing. Then what I just did was I added in like a little bit of flourishes here. Oh, we're using some RPS hats as well for this little bit of a fill. So main thing was to get like the standard open hi-hat bit in pattern, and then add in some little kind of like flourish there, which just sounds cool, I would say. I think it's in the original. Something similar to that is going on there. So that's kind of what I was recreating. So once the pattern is done, the main thing is sound selection. In this instance, I have this drum rack that I set up with some of my favorite sounds, and I just kind of flick between them until I found something that I liked by flicking back and forth between this and what we got here. And then I did tighten up the end point of the loop to make it a little bit more one of those like, or else it's like all fucking big and wide. This tightens it up quite a bit, and then I adjusted the fade out to make it kind of a little bit tighter and a little bit more of a natural cutoff instead of just hitting a wall there. Did I do anything else cool? I transposed it up one semitone, and I did play with this like pitch bend thing, which I think is making it so that the first hit is a bit of a higher pitch, and then it goes down to the lower pitch, so it can add kind of like a nice like snappiness, and again kind of making it sound a little tighter too, I would say. Then standard channel strip, so removing a bunch of the lows, increasing the attack a bit to kind of try to emphasize that hit of the open hi-hat, the initial hit, and then bringing down the sustain to again try to tighten up that sound of it. If you listen to the original, it's pretty tight. I feel like there's maybe a shaker layered on top too that I didn't get, but pretty cool. So pretty tight, and then just a little bit of this width plugin. I was just playing with it. It's there, and I don't usually make the open hi-hat wider, but I liked it. If we turn it off, I feel like it's just adding almost some presence to it or something. Yeah, I just dig it, so I did it. Yeah, main thing there is the volumes though again. I think ours could go up a little bit, but I think we're good with that. Next thing that I added was the closed hi-hats, so let's take a look and listen to that. I'm gonna go ahead and solo it too. And I'm gonna solo it with the open hi-hat, so you can hear they're working together. Cool. Pretty big fan of how that turned out, actually. So first thing with the pattern, so if you can see kind of the more deep, darker yellow hits here, basically I usually start by having the same hits on the offbeat, so it's similar to the open hi-hat, and emphasizing the open hi-hat, and also as an arrangement bit, when you pull the open hi-hat, you still have something kind of keeping that driving hi-hat element going. Okay, so this might look a little bit confusing. I usually explain this in the same way, but it's like, I did the first half of this, like this, and the main thing was kind of like, if I'm not mistaken, this probably started off more like just this, like that, and then I kind of got like the pattern right like that, because it's very much like almost 16th notes. You can hear quite a lot of hi-hats. And then basically just played a lot with the velocities. So you can see down here, it's kind of like cascading almost, just adding some kind of humanization feel to it. If it was all straight, it sounds so robotic and crappy. So that's one way to humanize it, and another way I like to humanize it and keep some interest going is by changing the sample that's being triggered. That's kind of the idea. So once like one beat was done, then basically you can just copy it over to the second bar there, and then just make slight adjustments. So you can see like this one's up at the top here. Some of these have been removed on the second half, so that way you're kind of creating some kind of call and response. And it's an easy way to tackle something more complicated, just breaking it down to one chunk, duplicating it, and then making a slight adjustment. In terms of processing, I want to see if I just did anything on the simpler device. Doesn't look like it. Looks like any processing was just standard mix as you go channel strip stuff. Oh yeah, if I didn't already mention, I probably mentioned the intro, but all this stuff, this channel strip and this whole project file and stuff is available in the link in the description if you'd like to get it. Definitely just makes things a little faster in my opinion. But yeah, so removing some of the lows, as you can see here, it's not really doing much. Then we're using the transient shaper to tighten up the sound a bit, the Ableton saturation to fill up the sound a little bit, and a bit of this wider plugin to kind of push the hi-hats into the stereo field a little. The main thing is trying to nail the volumes. Cool, and then we got one last one here, which is this break shaker. So let's have a look and a listen to this. I'm gonna bring up the volume here. Really cool shaker. I might use it in other tracks, to be honest. I just found it on Splice, I think. But I don't know. It sounds like light and nice, and I don't know. I think there's not really a shaker in the original tune. Maybe like a little bit. I don't think it's doing this much of like a constant shaking pattern, but I threw this in here to kind of get that going. Threw it in there. I don't know if I'm doing anything crazy, main thing is just channel strip, removing some of the lows, but it's clearly not doing anything because it's already been high pass quite a bit. Doing some sidechain to add some pumping and some groove and to make some room for the kick, and then a bit of saturation to fill up the sound a bit, and then that width plugin to push things into the stereo field a little bit. And yeah, that's a pretty good look at the drums for this one. Alright. So when it comes to the bass, one of the first things, as usual, is to make sure that you have the reference track actually in your project file. And you can just turn it off and you can map the S key. So you can flick back and forth between what you're working on and the reference track. And this is going to help you in several ways, as you're going to find out here as we slowly unfurl this 80-20 rule. So one of the first things I like to go over is, let's start track by track. So I'm just going to set up the first bass layer that we have, and let's start by going over the MIDI. So let's take a look at this. So I'm not super music theory master man or anything like that. What I can say is what I did do is, you can see here that the track's in here and you can't extend it left and right. That's because I consolidated this piece here, which you can do by grabbing a piece and then pressing Command J or Control J. And then I just dragged it into the empty MIDI clip, and then Ableton basically made a bunch of nonsense. So I can just quickly show you what that looks like. So you just consolidate like this, you drag it into like the MIDI, and then convert to audio. I selected MIDI like this, and then basically it gave me, you know, something similar. I think if we let me just try something. As you can see, not perfect, but it kind of gets you in the ballpark, especially if you're not like a super music nerd, I guess. And then so once that was in there like that, basically I just kind of cleaned everything up and then started adjusting things by ear and flicking back and forth between what I'm working on and the reference track to make sure to get the notes correctly. Some of the cool things I noticed is that there's like a lot of these really quick succession notes like that, which is like barely almost triggering like a note. It's almost creating like a ghost note, kind of like little percussive kind of sound. Really cool aspect of the bass line there. And then the other thing that I would mention is, if you look at this bass line, what I basically did is the first 16 bars plays like this, and then the second 16 bars plays like this, and I just color coded to show there's a difference, but there's like barely a difference. It's just like I moved one of the notes at some point, so there's just like some subtle changes happening over time is what I was going for. So that's a decent look at the notes. For the most part, I would say, I don't know, screenshot that or something, or grab the project files. But then the other thing is, moving on, once you have the right notes compared to the reference track, the next thing to move into is the right sound selection. So what I usually like to do is, I like to work with multiple tracks in the bass. So I usually have a sub track, and then I have another track for the mid bass. The idea is the sub is going to take care of all like the low end and make sure that like the fullness of the track is sounding nice and full. And that way you can have a separate track that's taking care of the mid bass, which is going to be more of like the character and the grit and like that sound design. And that way you can focus on the sound design of the bass without worrying about like making any changes that are going to mess up the low end, because the low end is on a completely separate track. In addition to that, by using a sub while you're just writing, it's similar to creating your bass line using like a piano or a guitar. It's a very simple sound. You can focus on the notes without getting too bogged down by the sound design or anything like that. So that's kind of the rationale behind that. In terms of the actual sound, I have this little rack that I've made, or whatever, called the V Sub 2. And basically it's just the operator device playing some sine waves for the most part, with options to add in different kinds of saturation. Saturation helps fill up the sound. It adds a bit of grit and character, and like it's gonna add that extra harmonics that will help make the sub sound like cut through crappy speakers and stuff like that. In addition to that, bringing up a scoop in the mid end a little bit here, and then I have this one knob sidechain device, which is just I'm gonna get into that. I'll get into that right now. Basically, what that is Ableton Shaper device mapped to a rate of quarter notes, so it's pulling down the gain in quarter notes using this shape, and quarter notes are usually what the kick drum's playing, right? So you don't have to do all that, like grab a compressor, route it, change like the attack and all that to get like a simple pumping sidechain sound. This way it's all with one knob like that. And then I do have a volume here just in case I need it, and then as you can see here, it's automated, so just at different points in the song I'm using this to cut out the sub, so that just the mid bass remains as like a kind of a little arrangement trick. And then lastly, I'm rolling off a bunch of the highs with an auto filter, getting rid of some of that high end, so it's mostly just the sub, taking care of the sub on the sub track. Then next up, we have this bass guitar sound, so let's have a look and listen to that. Let me turn it off. And on. And soloed. So you can hear soloed, it sounds absolutely awful, but the idea is it is meant to blend in with the sub track there. And so, first thing is, in terms of the notes, the MIDI, there's no MIDI here, as you can see. The thing that I usually like to do is, instead of having it's set to all ins like this, which means that if you're looking at the mouse, I hope, over here on the track on all ins, that means it's going to look at whatever MIDI is on the track. But over here, if you can see, I set that to subs, which means that it's going to look for the MIDI not on this track, but instead on the subs track. And this way, if you make any changes to the sub sound at any point, or if you want to cut out the bass completely at one point, you don't have to cut it out here and here. It's just going to follow along, and it just makes it a lot easier, I think, because you're trying to treat it as one cohesive instrument. So that's how the notes is taken care of. Another big thing that I always do is I make sure I have the Ableton pitch device, because that way, say if what sounds good for the sub might not sound good for the mid bass, so you might want to go up an octave, down an octave, up 2 octaves. It can really depend. And in this case, I'm going up 1 octave. Then I'm running this into this Trillion Chapman device, which is basically Ableton sampler. I sampled a bunch of notes from one of my favorite bass sounds, but didn't want to keep loading up that VST every time. So I just threw it into a sampler device here, and you can grab this if you want as well. Basically, it's just a cool bass guitar sound that I really like, and it's usually my go-to mid bass sound. So that's a cool way in your end too. If you have your own signature mid bass sound or bass guitar or some kind of analog synth or something like that, it could be a cool way to add kind of that through line between all your tracks, so that you have a signature sound that's slowly developing. Even these subtle things like that can really add towards a signature sound. Yeah, in terms of any processing, we're using the circuit distortion here on just increasing some drive, 7 decibels, quite a bit. And then I'm also playing a little bit with the envelope here, so I'm bringing down the sustain a bit, so it's just making it a bit tighter against the sub sound, trying to glue it together in a way, make it kind of cohesive. Then another big thing is when you're working with sub and mid bass tracks. On the mid bass track, you're going to want to remove a whole bunch of the low end, so I have things cut at 153 hertz here. This is making sure that the sub is taking care of all the low end, and you're not having overlapping frequencies with your mid bass track and getting things to sound all muddy. Simple stuff there. And then I am removing a bunch of the highs on this with a low pass filter. Sometimes I use a high shelf, sometimes I use a low pass filter. In this case, it's a low pass. The high shelf can sometimes sound more natural, but sometimes with basses it does sound good to have that. It's actually pretty normal if you think about it. Synthesizers always have that low pass sound, low pass filter to them. So I don't know why I was rambling about that, sorry. But yeah, I'm cutting it 2 kilohertz there. Just getting rid of some of the high end, or else this is what it sounds like with it off. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's adding all this wubbiness and too much high end. Yeah, that's a big thing there. Then I'm running it into this one knob width plugin, which is just the free Polyverse wider plugin, super sick plugin, and I've just mapped the main knobs here to an Ableton rack, so you don't have to open up the plugin and waste time with that. It's just quickly adjust things to taste and move on. So you can see here, just using some of the width, it's just making that mid bass sound a bit more stereo, pushing it to the left and right, and yeah, that way the subs is taking care of the center there. Then what we are running into next is this one knob sidechain rack. So very similar to how I had it built into that V-sub one. This is just one that I have attached to every single one of my audio and MIDI tracks. This whole channel strip here rather actually is set up like that. And this is creating some pumping, which is cool vibey stuff, but also it's making room for the kick as well, which is a big thing in dance music. And then we're also running into, this is just an Ableton saturation device, so bringing up some of the saturation, which is kind of filling out the sound a little bit more, and yeah, adding a little bit of grit and character to the bass sound as well. Yeah, that's a look at the bass for this one. All right. So first things first, just like with every other portion of building up this track, first thing is to remember to have a reference track brought into your project file. So I have the Mr. Belt Wezol song, it's not right, but it's okay. And turn it off, and then set it up so when I press the S key on my keyboard, and jump back and forth, so we can pick the right notes, select the right sounds, and set the right volumes. That's really going to get you a lot of the way there. But in terms of the melodic stuff, let's work through this group. One of the first things I added was this kind of just ambiance. We have a listen to it soloed. There's some drums in there, but it kind of felt more like a melodic thing to me, so I kept it in this section. It's not really in like the, if you listen, I can't really hear too much of that. I just thought it sounded cool, so this was a little bit of like my own decision. This found something cool on Splice. Didn't make too many changes in terms of the clip, and just standard channel strip stuff, so removing some of the low to make room for the bass and the kick. A little bit of one knob sidechain so that it's kind of pumping a little bit and grooving and making room for the kick as well. And then a little bit of saturation to bring it out a bit, fill out the sound, and a little bit of this one knob width plug-in to make things a bit more stereo, push to the left and right, and keep the center free for like the vocals and stuff that we're gonna add in a moment. I'll go over this channel strip stuff a bit more in detail in a moment, but since this layer is not super important, let's just move on from it, I would say. Now let's get into some important stuff. So let's turn on this next one and take a look and listen to it. So basically what this is like the kind of main synth. We listen. That kind of thing. And so when getting this pattern right, definitely there's a couple of different things that I tried, and I almost got so frustrated that I kind of gave up on this completely. But the first thing that I did was I tried to just drag I grabbed some of the Midi and just dropped it into the Midi track and used like the convert to Midi function to get the melody, and then try to play around with that. That didn't work. Then what I did is I tried to like build out the chords and use like the new arpeggiation transform feature here. That sounded too generic and boring. I tried chucking like the arpeggiator on the track, and everything was really sucking. I got to the point where I went in Splice and just looked for like a similar arp kind of sound and wasn't able to nail it. Literally almost gave up on the track. And then what I ended up doing to get this pattern is I did do the drag function. So I dragged this over onto the MIDI clip, and it gave me some notes that were correct. And then basically I just flipped back and forth to a part like, let me go to like maybe here. Just use my ear flicking back and forth to try to get like the notes in the correct positions. That's the main way I can kind of show you how to do it, but this is the MIDI right here, and of course the project file is available in the link in the description as well. But that's a look at kind of how the journey to getting the right notes selected, because that's really the main thing. First one, you want to get the right notes, then you want to choose the right sound. So in terms of the sound, what I did was I was looking up like kind of M1 organs, house organ kind of sounds on Splice, and ended up finding this sound, which is I think similar. It's actually a full loop. What I did was I just dragged this full loop. As you can see, like it's just really triggering, if I can zoom in, it's really just triggering like the first note of the loop, and it actually is just ignoring all the rest of it. That way I'm just playing that one little bit of the first note, and then the MIDI is just changing the melody of it. Cool way to just, instead of having to do like traditional synthesis or sound design, you can just chuck stuff in like that. It's a cool little thing that I like to do quite a bit. And we're finding like a nice properly sample and then just using MIDI to change the note of it. So that's how I got the sound of it, and it's pretty similar to the main sound. It's definitely some kind of like M1 organ sound, I'd say. Then in terms of any processing, standard channel strip stuff, so removing a bunch of the lows. I have this set up to always load up on every single one of my audio and MIDI tracks. This way it's just really quick. So removing a bunch of lows to make room for the bass and the kick. Try not to get anything too muddy. Not doing any transient shaping, so we'll skip that. We're doing a little bit of sidechain, so it's just some pumping sidechain. Make room for the kick and then give it a bit of that kind of groove that the sidechain can do. The way I like to do it is I have an Ableton shaper set up to go on quarter notes, which is quarter notes is what the kick's doing, and then it's just ducking some volume with the utility. This way you can just drag it in by ear. Instead of having to like route compressors and dial it in and all that stuff, you can literally just bring it up the volume or the knob on this to taste and move on, which is kind of the way I like to do it, kind of mixing as you go. Then a little bit of Ableton saturation, well, quite a bit, 9 decibels of this. This is just Ableton saturator device set up here so that I can easily dial it in with one knob, and it's just adding some fullness and a little bit of like kind of not quite distortion, but definitely some kind of like grit and character to the sound, pushing it up quite a bit. Then I did play with a shifter, but I didn't use it. And then I'm just running into K-clip here, kind of clipping it a little bit. I think I just used this to bring up the volume. The sound was just kind of quiet, so that's how I just use that to bring up the volume. The main thing here, again, is all this processing is nice. It's doing some like subtle moves, but really the main thing, the biggest bang for your buck, is going to be flicking back and forth and trying to listen to that ARP and trying to get the right volumes. The volumes is going to get you that 80% of the way there kind of thing. Next up, we have this next element, so let's take a look and listen to that. Solo it for a second for you too. So I believe if we have a look here, the MIDI we were just looking at is hovering around like G2, and this one is hovering around C3. So basically it's the same MIDI, it's just been pushed up an octave. And what's going on here is it has found a different sample on Splice. It's some kind of like organ sound again, or almost it's kind of an organ sound, but higher up it kind of has a cool like Asian vibe to me, I guess. But I think it's cool. And I basically just found a similar sound and then an octave higher to layer above the main sound. I kind of can maybe hear that in the original, but either way, I liked how it turned out in this version. So again, once the notes are set up and the sound is set up, similar to the reference track, then we just do a little bit of processing. But the main thing again is the volume, so just kind of blend the two together. In terms of the processing, we're just removing a bit more of the lows because we want like the low of that original ARP to be taken up a bit more of that, and try not to get any overlapping frequencies as much, which can create mud and crappiness, and yeah, not what you want. And then I'm running it into this transient designer or shaper, which is this free kilohertz transient shaper device. And basically what we're using it is to shape the transients of each of the notes. So we're bringing down the attack, which kind of softens the sound a little bit, which is what I was trying to go for, to soften it up so that it's blending in with that first ARP that we built up. Then some one knob sidechain, a little bit more of it, so it's pumping a bit more. A bit of saturation to fill out the device a bit, or fill out the sound a little bit more. And I'm using this one knob width plugin, another free one from Polyverse called Wider. And again, just map the main knobs to a rack so that quick moves don't have to keep opening up VSTs and use their weird interface and get confuzzled by anything like that. You can just do quick one knob moves. In this case, I'm just using the mono feature that it has to make that sound a bit more mono. And I should mention all these racks and everything is available in the project files if you'd like to grab that. And then running into K-Cup again to bring up some volume on that. Then the next thing that I added in once that main ARP was created was some vocals. So I'm pretty happy with how these vocals sounded. So I'm going to play a bit of this into it, and we'll just listen to a little bit of the vocals that we got here. So let's flick to the original. I think we can bring up our volume a bit. Flip back again. So the vocals are a main thing that I was trying to show you there, was trying to get the volumes to the same level. So in terms of sourcing the vocals, I was looking for some kind of like some cool kind of like R&B kind of sound, similar to like the vibe of I think it's Whitney Houston that was doing the original "It's Not Right, It's Okay" tune there. So if I kind of sounded something similar, female singer, R&B style, ended up with Jennifer Lopez, "If You Had My Love." What I did is I chucked the full song into a website called lalal.ai, which I used to separate the vocals from the instrumentals, and that's how I was able to get like a clean vocal. Then once that was in there nicely, I think I did have to change the pitch. So I usually go to a website called all you have to actually really do is type in the name of the song, Jennifer Lopez, "If You Had My Love," and then key BPM, and it'll tell you what the key is. And then basically I was able to see that I needed to pitch this song up one semitone for it to match the instrumental that I've been building up in the previous steps here. So pitched it up a little bit, set it to Complex Pro so I can adjust performance and envelopes just a little bit. It was mostly just to ear and to taste. And then in terms of any processing, I'm not using this Nectar device. Just a little bit of EQ to get rid of some of the low end, a little bit of sidechain to pump it up a bit, or pump it and make room for the kick, a little bit of saturation to filter the sound a little bit, and this time we're using a touch of this width plugin to make the sound a bit more stereo, pop out a bit, and a little bit of K-clip to bring up the volume of the track. And then there's a certain point where there's this cool little A1 trigger gate thing in the second end, like kind of the end of the tune. I'll show you that in the arrangement video, but that's pretty much it. Not too much processing going on. I'm doing a little bit of sends and returns here. So a little reverb being added on this send here, and then a little bit of shorter delay and a little bit of longer delay here, which is adding kind of like atmosphere. Boom. And then the last two tracks here that we're going to go over is then this starts getting introduced. So let's have a look and a listen right here. I'm going to keep turning off the vocals just so that it doesn't interfere with the voiceover here. Turn it up a bunch. Recreate. So here's a look at the Midi. I think what I did is I just dropped it in. It was just playing with the same Midi that we had before over here, and just kind of removed a bunch of notes so that it could be more of like kind of a call and response. So basically reusing the old Midi clips that we had before. We're hitting kind of similar notes, just at a higher octave, I believe. Then in terms of the sound, I was going for some kind of like Asian vibe for sure. So I looked up kind of like kotos and Asian kind of instruments and try to find stuff with a C note so that it would play the Midi, and I found this cool little koto bending kind of thing. In terms of any processing, removing some of the low end, a bit of sidechain, that's pretty much it. And I pan this one a bit to the right, and then I have another one that we're going to pan to the left. So let me introduce the second element here. Solo it for a second, and then put the two together. So what you might be able to tell is I actually made this Midi first, and then as you can see here, I ghosted out some of the notes and made it so the other track is playing that. So that way there's like this kind of like, if you look at the Midi here, like this one plays, and this one plays, and this one plays, and this one plays. So there's like a call and a response happening here. And there's a bit of a left and a right thing going on. So it's almost like there's a conversation happening, which is really cool. That's a look at the notes. Can't really explain too much music theory, but I'll move on. Then I did find another similar kind of koto, kind of like Asian kind of sound. The other one has more of a bend to it, and this one's more just flat. And so it's just like a slightly different sound, but it's in the same kind of style. Then in any processing here, we're just getting rid of a bunch of the low end as usual, a little bit of sidechain to pump it and make room for the kick, and then some saturation to fill stuff out. That's a pretty good look at that. And then there is this last little bit. It's kind of more of an arrangement bit, but there's one part in like the breakdown where there's this piano. So let's have a listen to that. Turn it up a bunch for you. And basically, I just found like in the right key, C minor. I looked up like just stuff on Splice for some one shots. I really don't like creating chords and using Midi. I actually kind of just hate using Midi. So my preference is usually to find samples. So just found a good sample. I think I found a slightly different version of that sample to kind of play a slightly different chord, and then pitch it down 7 semitones to make it so it sounds like a chord progression's playing. Kind of my style of doing things. I'm not a big fan of Midi. I like sampling and chopping and cutting and finding unique ways to get around sound design. So that's kind of a big thing that I like to do. All right. So when it comes to the arrangement, there's a bunch of tips I'm going to want to dump on you right here. So first things first, one of the best things you could do is make sure you throw the track as usual that you want to reference into the project file. So I mentioned every time as I'm working through these things, but with arrangement, it's super important as well. So you can see here, we have the Mr. Belt and Wezol song, It's Not Right, It's Okay, in the track here. And I have it turned off and set the S key on my keyboard so it solos. So good. So it solos the reference track, so you can flick between what you're working on and the reference track really quickly. It helps while building up the song like vertically, but it's also really helpful when it comes to arranging your track. And actually, one of the first things that I do when I'm working on any one of these tunes is obviously I put this, like, the reference track in here, and then what I actually do is I build out what I call as an arrangement track here. So I can kind of map out all the moments in the main song that we're going to be referencing. So basically, all this is a MIDI clip or a MIDI track, and I have all these dummy MIDI clips, dummy in the terms of like there's no actual MIDI information in them, they're not triggering any sounds, just using it so I can like color code these little blocks and move them around while I'm trying to figuring out the tune. So we have section for intro, when the sub comes in. In this particular song, it's using like a sample where they're using a verse and kind of chorus dynamic. So there's kind of verses drops. Then there's the breaks. There's usually that moment where, you know, things drop out to add a little tension and then a little release. So drops, and then like there's usually a build down and an outro. So I'll go through very first thing, drop the song in here, and then build up the arrangement. And this is helpful so that while you're building up the song, like say if you're starting on the drums, you might want to set like your loop marker over here and focus on flicking back and forth between what you have and the reference while you're building up the intro. Then once you have the drums all set up, because you've been building them in a nice area where there's only drums, you can then move the kind of loop marker over to here where there's bass, and then you can work on getting the bass down. Then you can move the loop marker over here. You know that there's going to be like synth and vocals, so you jump over here. And now as you're building out your synths and your vocals, you can be making it against the reference track in the right area. So that's super helpful as you're building it out. But then it also becomes super helpful as you start to actually take what you've been building, like say you've been building like a 16 bar or 8 bar loop, you can now easily kind of extend it by following this arrangement track and flicking back and forth between the reference to hear what needs to be added or taken away for those individual sections. So here's a little concept that we're going to go over next. These larger chunks, intro, sub, verse, break, drops, these are things that I like to call macro transitions. So they're the larger changes that are happening throughout the song. When you listen to the intro and then you listen to the sub, there's a pretty clear change that's happening. When you listen to the sub and then you listen to the drop, it's a larger change is happening. So these are larger changes happening throughout the song where the listener can definitely tell what's going on. In traditional songwriting, this might be a macro transition would be the verse and then going into, say, the chorus. So larger changes that happen. These are usually going to be 16 bars, like you can see here, or 32 bars, like you can see here. They're usually in larger denominations of phrases or anything. I'm not sure you fully say that. Then what you have is, and that's why the arrangement track's really good for mapping of those macro transitions. Then what you have is things like micro transitions. So micro transitions are the smaller little changes that are happening throughout the song to make it sound interesting and dynamic and have things moving over time. So a good look at that might be this. So we're gonna have 8 bars of just this main synth. Then the next 8 bars, this is going to get introduced here. That would be a micro transition. It's not like a full change in the section, but a small change is happening. Then another one here. Little response. These are smaller changes happening every 8 bars. It could be an element being added, an element being taken away. Another good example of that is like this kind of kick drop here. So let's have a look at this. This is a really good version of micro transition. So full kick gets dropped a bit and then removed, boom, and then the kick comes back. So it's a small way to create a micro transition, a small little change in energy. Listen. So then when the next section comes in, when the kick comes back, it feels impactful and interesting and kind of just changes. It's not going into a full break. Like this would be a macro transition, micro. and this is a macro transition, a larger, more obvious change is happening. And then in addition to that, I want to go down to here. I usually like to have something like this, like an effects group, where it's just like, one of the first ones I'll usually do is like, I'll add in a bunch of these, reverse crashes into crashes, so just have a listen. So this is a cool way that you can have like a crash on like new sections. You can have reverse crashes going into crashes to make them even more impactful. You can have just reverse crashes on their own like this. We're gonna have a look here and listen to this. Listen to the swell. Very subtle stuff, but it kind of like lets the ear know that like a change is about to happen, and it adds some interest too, like just having these like little sweeps, laser sounds, those kind of things. You can have these every like 8-16 bars or so. Keeps things interesting and also gives clues to the listener that things are about to change, new elements going to be added, taken away, those kind of things. This is another really good example, another good look at the micro transitions. So with that said, normally I do a like full run through of the track, but I kind of am getting bored of doing that in the last little bit. So this one, I just wanted to give a bunch of like really good tips for how you can arrange your tracks. So I definitely would recommend kind of building things out vertically. Then once you have things built out vertically, then you can use the arrangement tracks that you have here to kind of flesh the song out in a really, really quick way. And then you can easily flick between what you're working on and the reference track to be like, okay, in the first half of the sub, for example, there's no like synth. Then in the second half, they bring that in. So if we listen back to the reference, same thing. Nothing on the first half, second half, the synth comes in. So you can use that to come up with like follow along. Someone who's already done it before, professional arrangement. And then you can make changes over time. So that would be kind of maybe the last thing I want to go over with this, because if you can have a look here, this is the arrangement of this tune, but then I decided that I wanted something different here. So I added like this little pause gap. So this isn't in the original tune. This is like my own idea, and that's why I really like this, because you can follow the arrangement of a song that's already done it before, and then you can start coming up with your own original ideas as a, like taking that as a jumping off point, and then changing things up completely if you want to. But at least you have a starting point so you can really quickly build out an arrangement and get to that kind of finished song stage. So let's have a listen to this, and I want to put the vocals on for it too. So sick. So you can see the kick has the load removed for the first little bit. Then we're going to drop the energy further by removing it. Very few drums. So just like rising sound. Micro transition, we're going to pull out everything. And then I like this little extra drop. So that little pause wasn't in the original, but I really liked it. And then also, usually the vocals come in the original tune, but I decided I wanted to slowly fade them in like that. So there's a bit of an instrumental drop. But yeah, that's a pretty good look at what you can do here. If you want a look at all the little tiny details, there is a link in the description to the project files if you want to see all the little micro transitions, and if you want to kind of grab these little templates and these little sounds and use it in your own project files, definitely you're welcome to do that. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good look at this one. So before we jump into the 80-20 rule, full recap of what we did here so you can apply this to your arrangements and start really finishing stuff fast, I do want to take a moment to mention that this video is also sponsored by our good friends over at Rocket Powered Sound. In particular, the drums that you're listening to, like the kick, which is one of the most fundamental sounds for the drums, as well as claps, some snares, I think even some hi-hats as well might even be used from pretty badass sample pack that they have called the Ultimate Sample Pack. There's over 1,000 sounds in that bad boy, and it makes it really, really easy to find some usable stuff that you can drop into your tracks and move on really quickly. If you want to grab that, there'll be a link on screen now and in the description. You can get 30% off as long as you use the Ultimate Best Friends code. Definitely take a look at that. And thanks again to Rocket Powered Sound for sponsoring this. And yeah, let's jump into the 80-20 rule now. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video,
then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs.
The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later, and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.